Hello, John McWhorter.
Hey, Glenn. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So it's Martin Luther King Jr. week, and we are black. We're black. That means we have to talk about it, right?
Suddenly we are important. That's right. I don't know how many...
No, we were important before, but we have certain duties that we have to discharge. And during King Week, if you're a public intellectual, one of those duties is to wax eloquent on the meaning, the significance, the future, and so on.
That's right. I think generally the expectation is that we're supposed to say something along the lines of, we've gone a long way, but we have a long way to go. If you don't say it, then the interviewer says it, and then you have to riff on that. I try to freshen it up every year. But yeah, this is always a busy week. I don't know about you, but I'm dealing with a blizzard of little writing assignments. It's not only that, though. It's also what happened with Barack Obama last week, so that's playing into it as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so this is a big black week, and that's what's basically coloring my life, so to speak, right now.
Well, hold on now. I mean, it sounds like you're complaining. It sounds like you're weary of all of this race stuff, and I mean... isn't that how you make your living to a certain degree?
Yeah.
How I make my living, for that matter. Nothing personal intended, but I mean, can we have it both ways? We want to be race experts and yet be weary of all this talk about race?
Oh, well, I'll tell you this. I do make my living commenting about race, although I would say that I comment about language about 40% of the time. But still,
sure.
But there is the race. But the challenge is that what I actually try to do is create something fresh, and I try to go beyond the old paradigms, because I do believe, and we actually discussed this in a previous Blogging Heads, that in itself, I think that the whole country is rather weary of the race issue, and I feel that quite often when I'm asked to write about it or talk about it, it's more genuflective than genuine. And I'm not making some tired call about racism or anything like that, but I think that media people are trained to attend to racism. Smart people, thinking people are supposed to attend to racism. But I think nowadays often it's a matter of, okay, here we go with this affirmative action stuff again. So yeah, I do often feel that there is a bit of dissimulation going on, and particularly during King Week, I definitely think that most people in the media who ask about it are doing it because it was an assignment and because it happens to be that week, not because they have any heartfelt interest in the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. So yes, you see me sighing a bit, but the week will end.
Hey, hold on, John, you're getting carried away, man. This is intense. No, I hear you loud and clear. I agree with what you're saying. The sentiment interests me, though. I mean, it's not just weariness. I mean, there's an edge. There's an edge to the way that your cynicism and your kind of fatigue, and I think you speak for a lot of people, but there's an edge with in the way that it comes through. And the dishonesty of our race discourse seems to be a part of it. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Let me speak for myself, but I think we will agree about this, which is to say that there's so much routinized, ritualistic, you're calling it genuflection, performance. So much of this faux sincerity, so much of this weepy lamentation, and so much of this self-congratulation, as you say, we've come a long way and yet we still, etc. The script for this whole performance was written a long time ago by another generation, hasn't kept pace with the rapidly changing and evolving structures on the ground of lived racial experience, identity, understanding, and so on. Hasn't kept pace with that. It's kind of locked into some kind of wax museum politics. I mean, when I saw Congressman John Lewis and the Reverend Joseph Loury on public television the other day in one of these Clinton-Obama surrogate debates about the issue of race in the Democratic Party primary campaign, I thought, it's a time warp. I'm in a time capsule. Suddenly I've been projected back 25 years to another era because I haven't seen those faces in quite that posture on this issue in such a long time. So I get it completely. And yet, the thing I want to say is, don't we really have a serious set of things that we could be talking about in terms of race in education, race in prisons, race and poverty, race and violence, et cetera, et cetera. So, What are we thinking? Right thinking, if I can include both you and myself in that category.
Yeah.
Critics to say or to do. How do we break out of this? And then there are 5 more cliche questions that follow in that vein. But I think you get the idea.
Sure. I think that what we need to realize is that there are always going to be people who had certain formative experiences and have a certain message. And as time goes on, there's a certain routinization. But then on the other hand, there are those of us who have to acknowledge and attend to the fact that times have changed. And so the idea is to be polite to the people who helped make our present possible. And I think that's very important. But then on the other hand,
Thank you.
have to, well, no, actually I'm thinking about people like Loury. I would agree that
fair enough.
Important.
Even an older generation than mine, I'm glad to know there is
Oh, no,
one.
I don't mean you. I'm feeling pretty old these days myself at 42. But we have to specify that things have changed. And without making it seem like we don't have work to do, like you're saying. And so, for example, I am always thinking about the very simple fact that we have many men flooding into inner city communities right from prison. That is a vital issue. And when somebody wants to talk about things like, whether or not Jamal and Tamika will have their applications looked at the same rates as people named Justin and Caitlin, as far as I'm concerned, that's less important than some of the more on-the-ground issues that we're dealing with right now. But you say that there's an edge in my voice when I'm talking about these things, and I want to say that that's not necessarily true, or it may be that there's an edge in my voice about everything in life, including what color my furniture is going to be. That's just, I'm a malcontent, curmudgeonly kind of person. So I'm not frustrated with my existence right now as a race commentator, but certainly there are things that happen this week and only this week that happen all the time, and maybe you sense a little bit of huffiness in me because we both know that that's also going to be all of next month. And our jobs will again be to take where a lot of people are sitting, or we might say mired, and then try to explain that there's a new way of looking at things.
Well, I'm kind of not in that business as much as I used to be. It used to be that in February, Black History Month, I'd get, 24 invitations or something, and I'd accept 4 or 5 of them, going around speaking at places, making a little money, and doing this performance thing on the race issue during Black History Month for some fresh-faced college crowd or some, jaded set of neoconservatives or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. But I've kind of gotten out of that business. I can't, too much time on the road, and, it gets tired after a while, and so forth and so on. And I must say I don't get as many invitations as I used to, because you young guys have taken over, which is fine by me.
Glenn, actually, I want to bring something up which actually ties into exactly what we're talking about. And that, talking about getting past the old stuff, this is crucial. The Bradley effect. Right now, many of us have been told over the past 7 days that the reason that Obama did not win in New Hampshire is because there were these white people who said they were going to vote for him, but then once they were in the voting booth, they voted for Hillary because deep down they are closet racists. That came out as soon as there was the tally. That was the good thinking thing. Now, the fact is that if you read, for example, the New Yorker this week, you see that David Bositis, and I'm assuming that I'm pronouncing his name wrong, has shown
Bositis, I think is what he says, but I know the guy you're talking about.
I don't want to make him sound like a disease, but if that's actually the way he pronounces it.
Yeah, I think that's what he says.
Okay, inflammation of the boats. But based on what he has found, and I don't think anybody can say that he isn't an authoritative figure, actually Obama's figures were basically the same going in and coming out. The change was in Hillary Clinton's figures.
Exactly.
Now,
I heard that.
What I'm worried about is that is going to be just dismissed as this wonky little fact, and that people are going to continue throughout this election to be looking for the Bradley effect, assuming that it happened in New Hampshire, when really it would appear that the Bradley effect was real back in the era before cell phones or DVDs. It did happen to Tom Bradley. It did happen to Doug Wilder, but that it doesn't happen anymore. I hope that we can get beyond that, and that's something that I'm going to be paying attention to because I celebrate the fact that the Bradley effect seems to have been an intermediate thing.
I expect in the particular instance that you're talking about, that is Obama's loss in the New Hampshire primary to Clinton, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the Bradley effect of Tom Bradley not winning the governorship of California or whatever. Mm-hmm. I expect that you're right about that. I expect you're also right to be vigilant that there will be a lot of phony or hyped up claims about the unwillingness of Americans, white, Asian, whatever, to support the candidacy of Barack Obama purely because he's black. That's undoubtedly to be overstated, and I'm glad we have you ever vigilant at the New York Sun to keep people on their toes. But I want to say about all of this that there is something, I think, really interesting and subtle about the impairment that Obama may suffer in his electoral ambitions in virtue of being black. And I think it's really quite interesting. So now in the Democratic primaries, as everybody in the world knows, there's this, we almost played the race card, we almost got into a race gender squabble, but we're going to walk away from the brink thing that's been going on between these two campaigns because of some remarks that Hillary Clinton and some remarks that Bill Clinton may have made about the Barack Obama candidacy. And the thing, and this may be contrary to your anti-Bradley effect point, I don't know, but the thing that keeps crossing my mind is these guys, I'm talking about the Democrats, are getting ready to run against the Republicans. I mean, I know how the Republicans run campaigns. You know what I'm saying? I don't mean that negatively or pejoratively. They're pretty effective at it. Do you really think that Barack Obama's confessed drug use is not going to come up? Do you really think nobody's going to find a way of getting that in front of the voters' attention when the time comes?
Well, it's interesting. I am quite prepared to, have things that I've written and this that I'm going to say now be held up in a year as showing that I was wrong. There are times when all of us are wrong. But it seems to me that this is 2008. And we're dealing with a new kind of America, and that if we're talking about swing voters, the people who could go either way, especially if the people are open-minded enough to be that sort, the type of people who have the camera pulled back, then when somebody mentions that Barack Obama, like quite a few people who are now highly accomplished, used marijuana and other drugs, and that he did it for enjoyment, and he did it a lot, but that it was a very long time ago, and he later became a community organizer, a law professor. I mean, I really don't think that that's going to have any effect, and more to the point, I understand the wisdom of people who are saying that somehow the Republicans are going to come out and slam poor Barack Obama with mud, etc. But my simple point is, where is it? If there was
hold on, John. Let me make my case, because I don't think I got a chance to say exactly what I want to say. I'm very considerably with you, because I think this, they won't vote for black is hyped and overstated. And in fact, the very logic of Barack Obama's candidacy and the success of it to date shows that that's not the case. And there's no reason to expect that, etc. Okay, so I'm with you on that. But I'm trying to say something here. And it's not just that Republicans are bad people. This is politics, and politics is politics. In other words, the guy is a confessed drug user. That could be used against him. Now, true. If you do it crudely, if you do it directly, if you do it without art, it can backfire, and it can be stymied, or it can be handled. The potential, but it's definitely there. I mean, I remember when George W. Bush was running in 1999 and 2000, and rumors about his past drug use, to which he never, fully sort of admitted. I mean, he said he had these various circumlocutions. When I was young and irresponsible, I was young and irresponsible.
One assumes, right? Yeah.
But it could also be said, and I don't know who to attribute this to. I somehow think it is President Bush, but I could be wrong. That if you don't want your kids to use drugs, the last thing you want to do is tell them that when I was a kid I used drugs. You know what I mean? So all I'm saying is, and I don't want to be misunderstood by anyone out there, I'm not playing the drug card against Barack Obama in any way, shape, or form. I'm simply making an observation that this is part of his baggage profile, or whatever it might be. And right now, the Democrats are going ballistic if somebody even thinks about, perhaps might have mentioned it. But what I'm trying to say is that in the real general election, things like that and other things too are definitely going to be part of the mix. And so they
and here's what I think about that. We have to think about the contingencies of each election. And let's remember, first of all, at the top, that Obama has not said, I did drugs and I really enjoyed it, get over it. He has dutifully said that he thinks it was wrong, it was a bad phase. And then with that said, we have to think about who he would be going up against. And so the choice if we're talking about the country, and especially independents and swing voters, is between Romney, who has a certain Mormon issue and who rather transparently is saying things that by committee rather than what he really believes, or Obama, who's got this sexy charisma, who's intelligent, who's a black Kennedy, etc., but he did drugs a very long time ago. Which would win out? I don't think that Obama's drugs would be decisive. Imagine if it were McCain, who is very old and who has trouble completely connecting with the Republican base, or Obama, who used drugs. Huckabee, I don't even need to talk about it. So it's also a matter of who he would be up against. If there were some shining Republican hope, then I would think, okay, the drugs are going to be a problem. But given that we have had a sort of, as they used to say, the seven dwarves among the Democrats, now we kind of have that among the Republicans. It's really, I just don't see it as that big an issue. There was a time when, say, drug use could knock out Douglas Ginsburg in his bid for the Supreme Court. But think about how long ago that was. There are people...
Well, I expect, and it was in law school, if I recall Ginsburg case correctly. I expect that... that would still be a problem for somebody getting confirmed to the Supreme Court. But I take your point, and I'm not trying to say Barack Obama is unelectable. I'm just trying to say his drug use is a part of his biography that's politically relevant, and the Democrats, when it's being talked about among themselves, about, just how fit is this candidate, et cetera, while one wouldn't want to make it a kind of hammer to beat him with, the fact that it would get mentioned or considered doesn't seem to me to be at all unrealistic. It seems to me to think you'd want to do if you were looking down the road. You just did an analysis saying you think it won't matter. I hope that's right.
Because we already know about it. It's not as if somebody from Fox News discovered it 2 weeks ago. He admitted it in his book, and it just keeps on not being brought up because our attitude towards drug use changes, just like our attitude towards alcohol. There was a time when if a president would have admitted that he was a regular drinker, it would have been a problem. That to us is anthropology.
But let me ask let me bring another thing up here. This is also the Obama race, the Democratic campaign, which is about questions about his competency, his fitness, his gravitas, his, quote, experience, close quote. And this comment that Hillary Clinton has been quoted many times as having made, that it took President Lyndon Johnson and his skills at getting legislation through the Congress of the United States to make the Civil Rights Act, although King's inspirational leadership was, of course, vital to, the revolution of the 1960s. People reacting to that as if it's some kind of slam at Obama to point out that, 15 or 20 years of experience at the top of the American government might be, extremely useful for actually accomplishing the goals of progressive advocates, and that one of the candidates might be better equipped than another. How is it a racial assault to point out that a young and relatively inexperienced candidate is considerably younger and considerably less experienced than another candidate, or to point out that experience matters? This thing befuddles me. And if I can just add one further point along these lines, I read in the New York Times the other day, John Edwards quoted in this brouhaha, he had to inject his 2 cents.
And he's
as saying,
right, I read
he didn't agree with Hillary Clinton's characterization of how the Civil Rights Act got passed. He didn't agree, and this is practically a quote, with giving credit to a Washington politician for accomplishing what the great Martin Luther King was able to do through his inspirational leadership. Now, when I read that, my eyes popped out. Lyndon Baines Johnson is now in the mouth of John Edwards, who would be the Democratic standard bearer in 2008, a Washington politician. In other words, the rhetoric of Newt Gingrich and the kind of anti-government critics of the Democratic Party and of the Great Society and the rest has been internalized unconsciously by a Democratic presidential candidate who then lambastes Lyndon Johnson, and by inference Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, as just the more doings of Washington politicians, to be positively contrasted with the inspirational outside of the Washington leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. What kind of Democratic Party are you going to have if you don't have a pantheon, if you don't have a brand, if there's not something you've accomplished that you're proud of? I mean,
I agree with you, and the twisted nature of all of that is really a matter of looking at perfectly sane people who listened to a perfectly sane, coherent thing that Hillary Clinton said and pretended to misunderstand it. I mean, really, it has to have been a matter of pretense, because why in the world would a white, experienced, democratic person who is seeking to become president say in public that Martin Luther King was not the hero of the civil rights movement? It's not that it would be infelicitous. It would make no logical sense of anybody who could walk themselves across a room or string a noun and a verb together. And so it means that people are listening to her and waiting for something offensive to be said, or they are just waiting to be offended in some way. Now, I think that Edwards is just playing politics. I mean, obviously
he's opportunistic. I know, but his stock fell a lot in my mind when I saw that, because it's a little bit of poisoning the well, and maybe he's desperate because his campaign could be coming to an end.
You know what's interesting to me, though, is that although obviously what Dr. King did was absolutely crucial and central, I think people do tend to forget that it wasn't just that he made the I Have a Dream speech and suddenly all of Congress got down on its knees and the music welled up on the soundtrack. As you know, the story of what Johnson, who you wouldn't have expected this of just, say, 6 or 7 years before, did to get that bill through the Senate is quite a story in itself. You could cast Randy Quaid as Johnson and do a great movie about that. And so Hillary Clinton's point, I don't like calling her Hillary for some reason. We don't call him Barack.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you about Senator Clinton. I agree.
Yeah, Senator Clinton's point, I think, was absolutely... It was absolutely crucial. Now, I do sometimes wonder how much we're supposed to count her time as First Lady as experience, given that it wasn't that she necessarily was all that successful at the things she was trying to do. But in terms of the Senate, yes, she's been in there pitching, and as quiet as it's kept, she's been pitching very well for her adopted state. And so, I was dismayed at all of that brouhaha. And I've also been interested to see that Barack Obama did specify very recently that was more a matter of his fans and his staff sometimes going beyond what he would say.
He did.
So it wasn't him, but it was his staff and people speaking for him. But very disappointing.
But I just want to reiterate this point about what the Democrats actually stand for and represent, and whether they can say so directly and build their forward motion from this point around some sense of what the party is about. I do think Obama's candidacy, which is a remarkable thing. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing, perhaps I should say. It's an extremely interesting development, politically, culturally. It's of historic significance, no doubt. And I think it's not at all yet clear what the full implications of it will have been, whatever the outcome of the primary and the general election. But one of the things it seems to me that it's doing that the mania around it, or the sort of transcendent quality of some people's hopes and expectations for this candidacy, is that it prevents the Democrats from doing something they really need to do, which is to figure out how to brand and communicate what their party stands for in a way that consolidates the potential gain that they have right now after a quarter century of Republican rule. This idea that, we can get to a new kind of politics, that we're just going to somehow float up above all of what we've been arguing about, all of the culture wars, all of the ideological and political, philosophical differences between the parties that have so many implications, that we can somehow get above or beyond them without actually engaging them, or without building movements from the grassroots up of people who are dedicated to what our party stands for and who are prepared to march behind it, that we can somehow all over a latte and at our internet terminal resolve the great social and political issues of our time that divide us as a people. I think this is a mistake, and it's work avoidance.
Well,
work avoidance for the Democrats. They avoid the hard work of actually elaborating a governing philosophy for the country that they can persuade the people of.
And here's one of the...
I know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, and here's one of the reasons for that, to go back to the point that you were making. The fact that someone like Edwards, who's supposed to be a populist, could so confidently dismiss Lyndon Johnson, and by implication what he did, as things that, Washington insiders, or, by implication white people in suits did, shows that history escapes people very easily. Time goes by, and, even smart people often don't really have a true sense of what went on. For a lot of people, it's clear, including apparently Edwards, the 60s was a matter of first the I Have a Dream speech, and that's in black and white, and Mahalia Jackson sings, and that's great. And then apparently the Great Society and the things that happened after that, that was just the background. I suspect that for people like this, not necessarily Edwards, what they would remember in, say, 1968 or 1970 is the film goes to color and people have big afros and there's Black Power and Stokely Carmichael. In other words, the drama and the theater, but not that there were people and that they were very often white and in suits and working in the government, got those Great Society programs going. Black people staffed them, black people were for them, but these were governmental, wonky issues. These were things that had a profound impact on black America. And this is the important point. In terms of the Democrats trying to come up with a plan for what we're going to do now, they would have to think concretely about what was good about the Great Society, say, for example, Head Start, what did not work about the Great Society, and to go back into one of our themes, making welfare an open-ended program, in my opinion, and then deciding what we're going to do now, which is maybe based on that model. I presume that governmental help and assistance would be part of it, but what would not be? And we can't do that if we think of history as just a matter of newsreels and hairstyles and how you happen to feel in 1969. That worries me.
Sure. I agree. I'm struck, though, by the contrast between the Republican candidates who stumble over themselves to connect to Ronald Reagan, and find every excuse that they can to point out that they would continue in the Reagan this and the Reagan that. However mythical this vision of the Reagan era is, quite so grand and transformative, and however dated, as Newt Gingrich is saying now in this recent book of his, I can't think of the name of it, but it's been getting some play, about how the Republicans need to really redo their message. They really need to come with another conception of what their party is about, because their sort of old coalition is fraying and so on. But in any case, they point to Ronald Reagan. They say, this is what we're about. We're low taxes. We're limited government. We're for guns. We're for traditional values. We got a coalition. This is what we're about. And ever since this New Deal coalition was sundered, and Democrats are made to be ashamed of being a collection of all these various interest groups, and of course that politics did collapse. And ever since they lost the unions have receded and so forth, and they lost their sort of unassailable base amongst the American working class, and they've lost the South and large portions of the West on a lot of issues, including race issues. Ever since then, they've sort of been a party without confidence. And one of my arguments for Hillary Clinton, who as a Democrat I'm supporting for the nomination, is that while warts and all, this crew, and that includes Bill Clinton, actually did figure out how to do Democratic presidential politics in a successful way in the midst of a very hostile environment. So you say her years in the White House don't count. I grant you they wouldn't count as much as if she had been Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense. I grant you that. But thinking about what actually has happened historically in terms of the sort of macro presidential politics thing, I think you've got between those two people an awful lot of experience and wisdom about how to get the job done in a hostile political environment.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, as a Democrat, I wish we wouldn't be in such a hurry to overthrow for this sort of mythic new day, the exact outlines of which we don't really quite see as yet.
Yeah, and something, I'm going to take another tack here. It's interesting that you would be going for her instead of Obama, because the way I see it is that we're at one of those times when both of the parties are ripe for a realignment. I mean, the fragmentation in both cases now is such that it's hard to say that they are really parties in the philosophical sense at all, except for certain symbolic hand waving that, most members of the party wouldn't even agree with. But I think that if we're going to have some sort of realignment, and I desperately hope for that, it seems to me that there's a certain element X that's often necessary. There's a certain thing called charisma. Ronald Reagan happened to have it, for example. You're right. Look at that era. Look at how supply-side economics actually plays out for academics in terms of their studies, in terms of what's happened in real life. And yet somehow there's just a certain quality that man had that made people rally around him. And in terms of Hillary Clinton, I think I admire her in many ways, but for reasons that I don't even need to enumerate, I find it hard to imagine that happening around her. Yes, she'd be a good horse trader. Yes, she'd get things done at a kind of a grinding pace. But in terms of really inspiring people, I think that it's rather clear that the person who would do that more is Obama. And let's remember that he wouldn't be just sitting alone in an echo chamber. He would have advisors. And so go to his website and look at his particular health plan. Certainly that would not be what actually came out. All of these things would be affected by people advising him, by getting it through Congress. And so it seems to me that, we need a realignment. I feel like we're at a point in this country where if we could push certain things over the edge, it would really be a new day. We'd be back to a kind of Camelot, not paradise, but certainly better than this. Who would be more likely to inspire that? Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? I think it's clear that it would be him. I find him more interesting. I find him to be a more active and nimble thinker than Hillary Clinton, partly because he hasn't been around as long. And so I'm more excited about him. Why are you not?
Oh, I'm plenty excited about him. I'm just trying to win. I'm trying to win the fight, and so we could go down the list of the different considerations. But let me just say, as a preface, I'm plenty excited about all these things that you're saying about Barack Obama. And as I said earlier, this candidacy is historic and it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, and it is. It's quite an amazing story, and every time I look up and see this guy in his mid-40s who's seriously running for the presidency of the United States, who not that long ago was sitting in the Illinois State
Nobody ever heard of
legislature.
Right.
Before that, was sitting in a classroom at the University of Chicago doing, teaching law students or whatever. It's pretty darn amazing, and what a country, you might say. That this story could be the story.
Yeah.
It's quite an extraordinary American story. So I get all that. About the intelligence, about the charisma.
He's articulate,
I see it. I see. Definitely got it.
Yes.
The intellect and the articulateness, the way he's able to present himself in front of people, and the excitement that he's able to engender.
And yet
in
you're
going to
vote for Hillary Clinton.
I see all of that. Yeah, I'm gonna vote for Hillary Clinton.
The reason
I was prefacing my argument by trying to acknowledge the validity of the thing, I'm not trying to dismiss it out of hand. But I'm a battle scarred, not as battle scarred as some, but I've been around a while, and I'm just afraid that the country ultimately won't elect Barack Obama to the presidency, and not because of his race. I'm giving one of the reasons. I'm for Hillary Clinton, and it's not a positive reason about Clinton. It's a negative about Obama. It is that I think John McCain could easily be the nominee.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the serious times that we face here in the world and all of this stuff, McCain's not going to do a Rudy Giuliani kind of try to frighten everybody to death demagoguery, but he's going to, of course, stress, just as Hillary Clinton has been stressing, the differences between having someone like himself who's ready to lead from day one, is the Clinton line, versus having someone like Barack Obama, who is a roll of the dice, as the Clinton line goes, in the White House. And I think that's actually an argument. I mean, I don't dismiss that at all. I'm not saying I wouldn't vote for Obama if he were running against McCain. I would vote for Obama. I'm a Democrat. But I could easily see people being persuaded over the course of a long campaign in a dangerous world where stuff is going to continue to happen, that the politics of hope and a new face to the world, and we're going to make the Islamic fascist, if that's what those people are going to call them, subside by showing them that we're this kind of open society where whatever, versus someone who says, I've been there, I know what to do, the Joint Chiefs have I have their confidence, I will bring all of that to bear, and I'm worried about the gravitas issue. That's one of the things I'm worried about. I'm also worried as a Democrat and as a guy who's on the liberal side of the policy spectrum about locking in what I'm seeing as the shift of the pendulum back in the other direction along a host of issues. I think that Hillary Clinton and company can get that done. And company, of course, includes Bill Clinton. And I guess I have to admit personally that Bill Clinton being a part of the team is one positive factor in my mind.
Yeah.
For the Clinton thing.
Yeah, I understand everything you're saying, but the truth is, as so many people are saying now, to the extent that internationally we're talking mostly about things going on in the Middle East and in the environs, who really knows? I mean, in terms of looking at things that have gone on over the past 20 years, who on either side of the political spectrum has a plan that they can point to as the way to go? Talk about Bill Clinton. Look at what happened at Camp David. You know, who really knows what we can do about Iran? I don't see that Hillary Clinton, even with all of her competence, knows something, has some book down in the basement that would make her more talented at figuring out what to do about these situations than Barack Obama by being there and talking to smart people and using his wit. And so it seems to me that really you get into some other kinds of issues. And I just keep thinking of something new. And not because I personally am much of a fan of lurching changes or new things. I actually kind of like things staying where they are. But in this case, we really might need something new. And Barack Obama will be something new. That face being put to the world, even if part of it was symbolic, I think would be important in tempering to some degree the rabid anti-Americanism that there is. Not only is he brown-skinned, but he's also of non-American heritage. That's important, and obviously within this country, for the president to actually be black, like on 24, would mean something. It wouldn't solve all of our problems. It wouldn't mean that there weren't too many poor black people. It wouldn't mean that Jamal and Tamika's applications might not get turned down. But still, I think it would turn a tide in the discussion, and in the purely self-centered sense, I would be very interested to see that if he were in the White House with his wife, with his kids growing up in front of us, the whole question as to what blackness is, I think would be advanced, and it would be moved beyond a certain tacit sense that the real black people are the ones who are kind of like Martin Lawrence, and that otherwise you have some explaining to do. I'm interested in those things. I don't see how...
I know, but I can't go there with you, man. I mean, it's not that I'm denying that what you say is true. First
but you
of
have
all,
different priorities.
obviously, it would be very significant symbolically and substantively for him being a black man and his family being an African-American family be in the White House. That would be real change. There's not any doubt about it. I'm not going to say that that's nothing. And, of course, no, it would not make all the ghettos go away or empty all the jails or have all the SAT scores come into a pretty equilibrium. No, but it would be something. On the other hand, this hopefulness that I see in a lot of people who have been critics of the orthodox racial discussion, as you have been, as I have been in my time, critics of the orthodox racial discussion, this idea that we're going to blow this conversation up. Barack Obama is going to be elected president. A black man, just like on 24, is going to be in the White House. And then all of these people running around, all these, I don't know, Al Sharptons, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but all these people running around, grinding this axe, giving us this old song, this old story, nothing's changed, everything's the same, race is this, you can't, if you're black, you can't, will be shown wrong. And moreover, all of these disillusioned young African-American men who don't have any role models, who are all dropping out of school and getting HIV and hepatitis and going to prison and dying early and not fathering their children. Well, it'll be a different story when there's a black man who can say, as a white man, as president couldn't say, blah, blah, blah about the black family and about values and about how we have to be fathers, so on and so on. And here, I think all of that is a bit fanciful, and with due respect, and I don't mean this really in any sort of negative way. I mean, but it's a bit superficial. It's a bit superficial to my taste about what has always been true, which is that race has never been just one single thing. It's never been just one implacable barrier. It's always been complicated. In other words, if there weren't profound racial intimacy, interracial intimacy, going back generations, indeed centuries, we wouldn't be the polyglot mixed people of various colors and hues that we are. That's a reflection of the James Baldwin, as I'm sure you know, used to get at this in his essays and in his novels all the time about the kind of overwhelming and awesome complexity of this kind of knowledge that the black and the white had of each other, and this kind of, connectedness and interdependency that we have in our psychic and emotional as well as in our social lives, and so on and so forth. It's always been complicated. It's still going to be complicated. And some of this narrative about that dances up here on the top, in my mind, of the froth that's on the surface of race in America, about, who's in the White House and who's the Secretary of State, and look how much money Oprah Winfrey has made, and doesn't every white kid have a poster of Michael Jordan on his bedroom wall? When we have formations in the center of our cities, and I could give a litany here, you know how the litany would go, but basically what it would say is that the material structural root of the society, et cetera, et cetera.
Obama.
Okay, I could go on for a long time. You see what I'm getting at?
I completely see. Obama's different. And so, yes, Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell, none of it really seems to matter. If it's an athlete, that's seen as one particular realm. But I think Obama will be different because, frankly, Colin Powell, I'm a great admirer, but if we were looking at America in a truly unbiased anthropological sense, if we were Martians, we would not say that Colin Powell is culturally African-American in any significant way. I don't say that as a criticism, but in terms of his experience, he's a guy. He's just a person. He's just a mutt. Condoleezza Rice, and of course we have her serving a Republican administration. It is significant that neither of those people really have what you might call a black inflection when you just hear them, and that is a culturally very important thing. It's much more important than people realize. Obama's different in that way. He is somebody who can be identified as rooted in the culture, for example, the church that he goes to. He can summon a black cadence when he talks. How you talk is very important. And I think that he would have more meaning than Michael Jordan or Condoleezza Rice or Colin Powell would.
That's so interesting. You could be right, John, but what fascinates me about what you're saying now is that here is Barack Obama, who very much is a self-made black man in the sense that he's black by election to the extent that he's black. And again, I'm not getting into this authenticity thing, but I'm just saying he worked at it.
Sure, he did.
He chose it.
He did, and it's an interesting choice, but it's worked. I think that.
Yeah. No, I'm not knocking it. Right. But I'm just saying. But in virtue of him having chosen it, for example, how we speak. What you say is very interesting. I'm not a linguist, but certainly the black cadence is recognizable. And when Obama code switches into it, there's a certain tingle that goes up my spine because it sounds just like, the way they used to talk on the block where I grew up on the south side of Chicago, which well may be where Barack Obama learned how to talk like that, although I suspect he learned how to talk like that before he got to the south side of Chicago. But in any case, that was a willed, elected piece of clothing that he put on himself, on his persona,
and look at how
to make himself black. He chose friends when he was in college carefully because he wanted to manage the impression that he was giving, since his identity was not of any of his own doing, was unavoidably ambiguous.
Yeah.
And so he is being black by choice.
And Glenn,
that is more authentic, you say, than somebody who descends, at least in part, from African slaves whose parents migrate from the Caribbean to the United States and who grows up, quote, as an African American, close quote, immigrant, second generation, in working class New York City.
Well,
I just find that interesting.
Barack Obama is a mutt as well, but he has put on certain clothes, and then it just comes down to how he comes off. And just imagine, Glenn, a president of the United States who can speak to the nation in that way at times. He wouldn't do it during State of the Union addresses, but can you imagine the effect that would have upon youth? And really, nowadays, in terms of people about 25 and under, white youth and yellow youth, that cadence that he can summon, which I am vocally handicapped, and I mean it by not being able to summon myself. To sound like this is a vocal handicap for a black person. For him to be able to do that is something that I am really excited by. He could speak to the nation. This whole world is listening to hip-hop. He can sound vaguely like the guys on those recordings. That's important, and that brings us back to the fact that Hillary Clinton cannot do that. Yeah. And so that's
no, she can't do it. I mean, come on, there's no argument about that. She can't do that. That's true. She can't do that.
She can't speak
in the way that there's a lot of other things that she and her 35 years of experience and in her obvious intelligence and her obvious political gifts that she has.
But political gifts.
There are a lot of things she can do, but she can't be a black guy.
Imagine
no, that's true.
Syria lobs a bomb into Tel Aviv. Let's say that happened. And so now Hillary Clinton is in the White House and she's surrounded by her aides. Oh goodness, what are they going to do? What in the world would they do? Now let's imagine Barack Obama there surrounded by his aides. I am utterly unclear on why somehow Hillary Clinton would be in a better position than Barack Obama to do something about that. Who really knows? And so,
well, come on, John. I mean, I can't answer that in any detail because I don't know enough myself. But here's what I'm saying. I mean, it's not just about running a government. It's about running anything, right? I mean, you could say about a business leader. Someone we're trying to pick who's going to be the leader of our company. We've got somebody with, two contending candidates with different track records. And again, I'm not trying to denigrate Obama at all, but the difference in their track records is considerable. Imagine a comparable difference in the track records of people who were contending to be in charge of, a $20 or $30 billion enterprise that all of our livelihoods depended upon. To say, we can invent a crisis situation. It's not clear to me who would make the right decision in that room. Doesn't obviate the relevance of the differential biographies of people to that kind of thing. Generally speaking, we do think that people who have been steeped many years in a certain practice and who have a record of accomplishment in that are that's something to be credited over and against an unknown. I mean, you say you don't know. Exactly. It's precisely because we don't know that we rely on these external indicators like the track record, experience, and previous accomplishments of the people who contend for these important positions.
Are you implying therefore that in any election our job is to choose the more experienced person and that therefore the less experienced person enters an election as a formality, the idea being to get their face before the public so that years later they can run as the more experienced one? Because otherwise the question is... No,
I'm saying the difference in experience counts in Clinton's favor. That's what I'm saying. And we have other things to consider and then we have to weigh the things.
Sure.
Okay, now you're talking about inspiration and such, and I agree with you that Clinton can't match this eloquent portrait that you've eloquently painted about Barack Obama being an inspiring figure, which indeed he is. She can't do that. She can do what she can do, and then it's a question of how much weight that we want to attach to these various things. Exactly. That's all I'm arguing.
Yeah, it's a matter of weighting. And I find myself weighting the inspiration over the experience. In this case, I can certainly understand your feeling differently, but I think that's obviously what it comes down to at this point.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about something else. That was very enjoyable, and I'm glad to know that you're going to be voting Democratic in the fall.
Yeah,
John.
everybody's surprised by that. That's right. Yeah. Actually...
You got this reputation as a conservative, man, which is a bum rap, may I say to the world. Yep. It's a bum rap.
No, well, yeah, I'm going to be stuck with that, but as far as I'm concerned, all I'm going to do is what I do, and I've actually tried to be pretty explicit over the past couple of weeks about my liking Obama, because I found, actually, that radio talk show hosts in particular call the Manhattan Institute and assume that I'm going to be this viper-tongued black guy who doesn't like the black candidate running. And I've realized that, they say we want to talk about Obama. And stupid me, I've gradually realized they don't want to talk about him. They want to bash him. And so I have, decided to make it clear in my writings that this is the person that I'm for. And I'm finding that people are surprised, but they shouldn't be. I mean, it's this weird thing, and I'm sure you've thought about this. If anybody ever had a reason to sit down and trudge through every single thing I've ever written, and that will never happen, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, they'd see that it's not a surprise that I'm not stumping for Romney. But unfortunately, we categorize, and so we're stuck with these things. But yes, this has been interesting talking about Obama. And
it has been. Did you see the brouhaha at the New York Times over Bill Kristol being brought on as a columnist?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, and it's unfortunate that Bill Kristol's first column actually had certain problems. But yeah, the invective. Oh, it's really... People get so excited. I mean,
somebody wrote into the public editor at the time saying he should, Kristol should be hung by his ankles and beaten by the mob, a Mussolini style.
These people need to get hobbies. There are people sitting in their pajamas getting that exercise over issues such as who's going to write 600 words once a week in the Times. The drama of this sort of thing never ceases to perplex me. Because really...
But as someone in the business, I mean, as Kristol and someone who writes for the New York Sun, that's a right-of-center publication, if I'm not mistaken, and so on, and you're there at the Manhattan Institute, so this is a world where conservatives at least pass by from time to time. Is Kristol a guru? Is he? I mean, I'm asking. Really, what is? You say that first column maybe had left something to be desired.
What an interesting question. You know something?
I know Bill Kristol, the political operative. I know Bill Kristol, the editor of the Weekly Standard.
Yeah.
Bill Kristol, the visionary. Bill Kristol, the critic of liberalism. I don't know. Bill Kristol, the wordsmith. Even these are things I don't know about.
He is. I don't think I've met him, but of course I watch him and know who he is. He's one of the people of whom my impression has always been, as I've come into this world, that he is an intelligent and vigilant person. But, talk about who really knows. It's not that there is any miraculous lock upon wisdom or prediction there. I'm always surprised to find out the fact that these people are ultimately normal people who read a lot but, can't retain everything in their heads just like none of us can, and are sometimes wrong. And so he has struck me as one of those people. There is a certain commitment he has. I think he would think of it as a kind of mental coherence. We have to have guiding theories. That, for example, the Iraq War is a good thing. It would seem to me that nothing that happened in Iraq could convince him, and this is true of many people, that the Iraq War had gone wrong, for example. He is one of those people. But certainly he deserves his slot on the New York Times page. He's somebody who pays a close kind of attention and with a certain caliber of intelligence that it's not as if he doesn't belong there. If David Brooks belongs there, he certainly does. And so, it's chilling to read about the sorts of things people say as if the man is taking food out of children's mouths or something like that. But that said, his first column, of course, had a factual misstatement, and I don't think that it was epistolarily brilliant. But then again, and nobody hits it out of the park every time, so we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to see. I'm less enthused, I guess, but there's no doubt he's a player.